Good evening. The regular meeting of the Brisbane Planning Commission of Tuesday, June 26, 2018 will now call to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Gomez,
Here.
Commissioner Gooding,
Here.
Commissioner Mackin,
Here.
Commissioner Patel,
Here.
Commissioner Sayason.
Here. Let the record reflect all commissioners are present. The adoption of the agenda, could we have a motion, please?
I'll move to adopt the agenda.
And a second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Motion is carried. Consent calendar, we have 2 items tonight. Is there anyone in the audience or on the commission or staff who would like to remove an item to discuss it? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent calendar.
I move to approve the consent calendar.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Anyone opposed? No. Motion carries. Oral communications. This is for any item that does not appear on the agenda. Is there anyone in the audience that would like to address the commission? Seeing none, we'll move on. I have no written communications this evening, so we'll go into new business. First item we have is a public hearing. This is on 661 San Bruno Avenue. It's an R3 residential district. Could we please have a staff report?
Yes, good evening, Commission. So the request before you tonight is for tentative parcel map approval for a new 4-unit condominium development at 661 San Bruno Avenue. Just 2 weeks ago, you all approved the design permit and other discretionary permits for development of the project. However, even though the current lot is a recorded subdivision lot, in the original 1908 Visitation Avenue subdivision map, because the Subdivision Map Act defines condominium developments as subdivisions, they are required to file for a parcel map approval. So I'll keep it pretty brief tonight. I think we've delved in detail to the actual design of this project. You're familiar with the site location and its access from San Bruno Avenue, etc. You'll find a lot of the findings for parcel map approval have to deal with, connecting to city services, road access, that sort of thing, suitability of the site for development. And as the staff report explains in detail, this project meets all the required findings for parcel map approval as it pertains to the design of the project, suitability of the site, whether or not there's adequate availability of improvements, connecting up to our existing utilities serving the site. One thing I'll note is our city surveyor provided some comments in terms of modifications once the final map is submitted, and that's pertaining to details for the private sewer easement that runs in the rear and side of the property. That will just be in the form of, I think, a note on the final map. And the final map approval, just as an overview, would be first reviewed by the city engineer and community development director. After it's found to be acceptable, it would go on to city council for final approval. So that's the process. I think I'll end it there. If there are any questions of the commission, I'm happy to take them, but we are recommending approval of the tentative map subject to the conditions and findings contained in the resolution.
Thank you. We'll start with Commissioner Gooding. Do you have any questions?
No, I don't.
Okay. Commissioner Patel?
No, I don't.
Okay. Commissioner Sayason? And Commissioner Gomez?
Nope.
I have one. Very simple. The note in the material staff report mentions the easement. I'm trying to find it. It says it will be mentioned condition of approval number 4. And when I went to number 4, I wondered if that was truly it or if it was really number 2.
You are correct. It should be condition of approval 2A.
Okay, that's all, because I was trying to understand why it would be number 2. Very simple. Okay, that's all I have. This is a public hearing, and so we'll open the public hearing. Is the applicant here this evening? Yes, and would you like to address the commission? If you could. Nothing to say? Okay. All right. Okay. You're welcome to if you want to. We're all ears. Okay. Anyone else from the public here? No? Okay. So we'll go back to the commissioners' discussion. Commissioner Sison, you want to start? Any discussion?
No, I'm ready to vote.
Okay.
None here?
No?
Likewise,
Okay.
ready to vote.
I am too. Entertain a motion, please.
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve tentative parcel map TPM-1-18 for 661 San Bruno Avenue.
And a second, please.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. The motion for TPM 1-18 is approved. Thank you very much. Next, we're moving on to a study session. This is regarding 3,000 to 3,500 Marina Boulevard. And this is proposed modification of design permit DP 5-07. Could we have a staff report, please?
Sure, just really briefly, you all, well, not all of you actually, two of you in January saw a study session from the potential purchasers of the property at 3,000, 3,500 Marina Boulevard. Since that study session, they presented a preliminary design to modify the previously approved permit. Since that time, they've made further modifications, and this is coming out of their discussions with BCDC, the San Francisco Bay Development and Conservation Commission. Did I get all of those letters? So there have been some changes to the site plan, and that drove some other changes to the other project features. And I'll let them explain that now.
Thank you. Can't wait to see what you're doing. It's an interesting project. If you could state for the commissioners in the audience at home what your name is.
Sure. My name is Michael Garrity. I'm with Phase 3 Real Estate Partners. We are specifically a life science real estate developer, and I think to give everyone a little bit of background, as you're probably aware, South San Francisco has quite a few life science companies, and they're relatively out of space, and I think you can see the movement of companies starting to move into Sierra Point, and HCP's begun their large project on Sierra Point as well. And so we see that growth, and we think 3,000 to 3,500 is really a great project if designed correctly to meet the needs of that industry. And so we saw an opportunity. We've been working with the current owners for about a year now to really figure out how this project could work for life science and going through different steps. And so, so we presented our first thoughts back in January. Those have now been updated, both with some of the comments that were provided then and comments that were provided by BCDC. And so, I would like to let SOM present here quickly, but I'll be here for questions, as there may be just also about what our plan is and how we approach the tenancy and the project and operations of it. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Michael Duncan, who's with SOM, and he can then present the site and our plan, and afterwards we can talk more.
Thank you very much.
Good to see you.
And could you please also identify yourself, please?
Yes, my name is Michael Duncan. I'm a design director at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill in San Francisco. And let's see if the technology is working. Great. We've talked with some of you, but not all of you, last time we were here. So I'll give you a quick kind of, I'll bring up to speed on what's happened so far. If you can see on your screens, this is the site. It's right on the corner of Sierra Point, right by 101. It's a great site right on the waterfront with incredible visibility and great assets. Quick agenda, I'll run through this very quickly. The overview, changes that we've had, some site considerations, things from our conversation both with your committee and also with BCDC. We've tried to consolidate them, and I think we have improved the project since the last time we've gotten together. And then a little bit more detail on the landscape, and some of the details will go through the building. But this is our current proposal, and this is the north facade. This is sort of the view as you're coming down 101 if you're right on the edge. Let me just quickly introduce you to the site. North is up here. On the left-hand side, or on the north side, we have the bay. On the left-hand side, we have a slough, which is an important body of water that comes almost the length of the site down there. And if you've been to this area, it's kind of down in a ditch. We have neighbors to the right, and we have neighbors to the south, and we have then access to the road. There's a small easement on the left-hand side of the site, and there's BCDC easements along the north, and now we think along the slough side. This was a previously approved entitlement for the site. Those at home can't see the model, but I'll just sort of hold it up for you. This was the previous proposal, was for 2 office buildings, 10-story office building, 8-story office building, and a garage. The garage ran along the west side of the site on the 101 side, and then we have surface parking between. This is, in our mind, this was a sort of a suburban model in terms of parking on site, and it also presented the parking garage to the 101 side as well. And in our feeling, it didn't necessarily embrace the bay or the bay trail or all the public amenities that we saw were possible on this site. This is the view from 101. You can see the garage in the foreground here, and then this is the site that was toward the water side. From our point of view, this site has incredible visibility, so we want to make sure that we take advantage of that on 101. It has on the site is incredible views toward the bay and both also towards Oakland, and then you're in views back towards San Bruno Mountain. So it's really a terrific site, and we want to kind of exploit those views and take advantage of them. We are aware of the wind and how it comes down the side of San Bruno Mountain, so we want to protect any public spaces that we can. And we're also very aware of how the sun moves through the site, so we want to make sure that the public spaces we have get as much sun as we can. These are a few views of the existing site. You can see there's nothing built on it right now. But if you take the upper left-hand corner here, you can, excuse me, you can see the opportunities for that site right here. The bay trail comes along the side. It ends right here, and there's you're right in the corner of the bay. As Mike already mentioned, this is a life science buildings, but it's also a life science campus. What's been very important is bringing other amenities to the site: fitness, dining, restaurant, event spaces, and creating not a standalone building, but really a series of buildings that work together, and then opening a lot of these public amenities to the public and having that be part of the life of this campus. We have parking, and we'll show you this. This is built over over fill, so we are actually building up from this site. We can't go down. We have a clay cap that they have to deal with here. And we are a life science lab office use, so we're, rather than targeting, last time we were here we had a long discussion about parking for office spaces versus parking for lab spaces, and lab has significantly less people involved with it, as well as the client's experience with their property just down the road in South San Francisco in terms of what they're seeing in terms of uses. We don't want to overbuild our parking lot. And we'll go into much more detail on parking in a moment, but we're providing 781 spaces of roughly a 1.8 to 1,000 parking ratio. When we last presented, the ideas are similar, but they've been modified. This is a drawing we showed last time. It shows this is the bay side on this side. We have 2 levels of parking. We have a outdoor public space that serves as kind of a courtyard above that, and then we have lab and office buildings on that. This gives us a chance not to spread the parking out all over the site, but actually to build a public space, an open green space in the middle. There are other amenities that we'll go into more detail, but we have a health club that is right basically at grade along the Bay Trail, and developing those amenities adjacent to the trail has been important. This is our ground floor plan, where we have a lay-by along the street here, entrances to 2 of the buildings. The red lines show the access to parking. The blue lines show the access to service, so we have service loading docks under each of the buildings. And if we go up 2 levels of parking, we have this open space with its view toward the bay. This is, as you stand in that space, you really look right kind of toward Oakland that way, and you look up toward Candlestick the other way. And we're able then to move up into the courtyard, into these office lobbies. And then we've loaded, on this level, we've loaded restaurants, event space, boarding, cafe in the middle. So we're trying to activate the edges of this, and we see this as open not just to the users of the building, but to the public in general. As you know, currently Sierra Point doesn't have a lot of amenities, but the idea of creating a raised space where you actually can see out over the water and connect to the landscape, we think it not only enlivens this project, but could help to enliven Sierra Point in general. This is the previous plan. We'll show you some modifications. We had 120-foot wide bars of lab and office. We've modified that now a little bit, thinned it out. Let me tell you some of the comments we heard both from your commission and also from BCDC was really focusing on the public access and public amenities. One of the issues that came up was disabled access, ADA access up to the upper level. We relying on elevators. We've now added a ramp that will get you up from the water side. We are providing additional amenities. I want to just emphasize that the conversation we had both in our smaller working group about the slough area, which was directly adjacent on the west side. And this is an area that's a sensitive part of the bay, and there's a lot of concern about how that gets used or how close development is to that, and what does the Bay Trail do, and does it come too close? There's a lot of contours in there, and we'd had in our previous proposal we had a couple of retaining walls that were, I think, a point of focus for us, and so we looked at that carefully, and we've stepped back a little bit and said, all right, let's see what we can do to improve that west side. So we have stepped back our project roughly about 60 feet from where it was, and you can see this is the 100-foot setback for BCDC, and we're taking that as sort of a guideline and stepping back from the west side, from what would be the high water mark along the BCDC side on the left, and we've moved our whole buildings tighter. So we're stepping out of that zone. And we're doing for a couple reasons. One is when we tried to get our road and our fire access and then a BCDC wide trail, which was a bike lane plus a walking zone plus some buffers, we ended up having to put retaining walls out into, it's still on the property, but into that slough zone. And our strategy now was, let's just not touch that. Let's step back and let's give enough room for a trail, basically following the existing grades, and enough buffer zone, and we'll move our building back. We had our courtyard, which was in the previous scheme. Something like this. And now we're squeezing the buildings a little bit closer, so the courtyard is something like this. I think the essence is still there. And let me go over some of the details and the impact it's had on the project. Here are the two plans side by side, with our previous plan on the left and the new plan on the right. And you can see we've stepped it back. Of course, we've lost 2 levels of parking inside the parking garage, but we've replaced that with some at-grade level parking. But that's provided us a little buffer, a little setback zone along the western side. We've also added a ramp access, and it's maybe a little hard to see on here. I'll focus in, but where the first you're going up 2 levels, so it's quite a long ramp, but we've embedded the first part of the ramp in the earth, in the landscape. We come up to a landing. We have a set of stairs that connect down here. It connects to that landing. It goes up. And then it comes to a terrace level that's just a little bit below the upper level, and then you take the last step up. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons. We wanted to be able to step the site down toward the water for sight lines, so when you're in the courtyard. We also wanted to zone the courtyard, so we have an area with the green. It's more of a kind of picnic green in that elliptical area. We have kind of a lower seating zone in that area right here that looks over the water, and then the ramp comes down and the health club's underneath that. So this is sort of stepping down the terracing here. We've also provided outdoor seating. We've provided a little bit more recreation area out here in front of the health club, so that both the health clubs can spill out, but also as people are running along the BCDC or along the Bay Trail, they're able to use that for stretching or for workout zone, or maybe even some workout amenities that could happen there. And we've then continued the trail down the left-hand side outside the parking zone. And you can see here, this is what I think could be a really very significant addition to Sierra Point. It's a little hard to see in the green line here, but the green line continues the trail from here around, down, and Phase 3 has purchased the site to the south, so we're working with them to actually extend the trail all the way down here and complete the loop at Sierra Point, so that would take us down to the intersection just below that the building on the lower left there. So there's an opportunity to add, I don't know, it's about maybe 20% of the complete loop of Sierra Point and complete that trail. And then in the future, if it wants to expand and continue north, we might be able to use it under the overpass and go north. So that's an important completion of that loop. And we would take that bike trail and walking trail and buffer zones and just continue it all the way down. This is a view of the north end of the project. Gives you a sense of the cascading stairs and this stepping down terrace, and our health club is right here, and there's some recreation areas directly out in front. So this is the new ground floor plan. You can see the access is similar. We're probably providing some bay access parking, probably at the very end here. We have 781 parking spaces on the site. We have access to the parking directly adjacent to us on the property below. But you can see we have 127 surface level parking stuff. That's outside the structure. We can discuss this in more detail, but we're looking at parking demands and comparing other parking opportunities in terms of office and estimated supply and TDM reductions, and we can go over this in more detail. We'll swing back to this, and maybe Hardik can talk a little bit about that, and potential TDMs that we can work out in more detail. And from the project point of view, here's the courtyard plan as it currently stands. The buildings are narrower. They're now 110 feet wide, so that allowed us to squeeze the building. It meant that we ended up adding a floor to each one now. So instead of 4 and 5, we're 5 and 6 stories above the podium level. And this is what it looks like from the entry, from the street side. So really from here, looking that way. And you can see the cascading stair and the landscape coming down. We've also bermed the earth up against these two sides. So like the cascade of earth that comes down on the north side, we're berming the edge of the earth up against this face, so these buildings sit on top of a green base. And we have a fire truck access that we need to provide around the edge of the building. The zone that's out by the bay, that dash zone there, we're doing in turf blocks, so this is a planted surface that then you can drive a truck over. A little more detail on the landscape. We are mixing trees in with the parking on the left-hand side. The zones up by the bay side are a mix of California native plants. We have a workout zone field there. We also have a series of bio-treatment areas that are spread throughout the site, and then several birch bosks and some bosks of trees that help to frame the space and provide some shade. This is a section going down the middle of the project between the buildings. So this area right here is the lawn. We step down slightly to this kind of a sitting garden view zone. This goes right through the ramp. So this is the middle of the ramp, the bottom of the ramp, and then the planting zone and then out to the trail. And images below give you some sense of some of the elements we're using: the Great Lawn, the Creekside Trail, the Birch Grove, and these slanted green walls that we have along the side of the parking zone. Left-hand section is the section by the slough. Let me just zoom in on that, maybe a little bit, it's hard to see at the scale. But we are following the existing grade down in this area here, down by the left-hand side. We have 3 foot of buffer, 12 foot of bike path and walking path. We have parking on either side, and then we have 10 foot of a biotreatment planting zone up against the building face. On the right-hand side, this is on the east side of the building. You get a sense of maybe that embankment raised surface planted on the slanted green wall that helps to take some of the visible height out of that wall. And then here's the view from the north. Get a sense of that ramp as it comes down. This area at the base is the health club zone here. And then cascading stair, and this is really the presence along the bay. We have a series of terraces that come out and balconies that come out of the lab spaces that allow people who are working the buildings to come out into that space, and some of them we're setting up wind screens here so that they will protect ourselves from the western wind on those terraces. One of the questions that came up within our discussion, and as we were going through the previous CEQA mitigation measure, was a fence that was requested along the edge of the slough, and there's what they call a clapper rail fence for clappers that are within the slough area, and we've been discussing with BCDC whether that is the appropriate solution. We could extend a fence as the dash line all the way along the edge of the slough. It's really to keep dogs and people from wandering down in that area. On the other hand, it does kind of visually prohibits people from seeing that. So our discussion with BCDC was, is there any other solution rather than a fence? Can you do it with planting or stiff planting or something that wouldn't be so prohibitive in terms of allowing either visual access or physical access out to that site? So that was kind of a requirement of the previous CEQA approval. We're hearing from BCDC come up with a different solution that might be more of a planted solution. There is a fair amount of grade there if you've walked this site, so it doesn't necessarily encourage you to walk down there. It's quite steep, sort of a 3-to-1 at the moment. So we wanted to at least make you aware of that issue, and we're looking for maybe a more planted solution that would not necessarily have to be a physical fence. But that's one issue that's come up in our discussion. This is our floor plans. It gives you a better sense of how they lay out. They're a little bit narrow, a little bit closer. And if we look at the sort of dimensions, they're about, at the narrow point, 84 feet away from each other. These buildings are, the 2 lower buildings are about 80 feet high to the parapet, so they're kind of a 1-to-1 at that end. At the other end, they're sort of twice that, or 198, almost 200 feet wide, so they flare out. And then 63 feet and 81 feet in terms of the spaces between. This is what it looks like in section and elevation here. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, that's a good point.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
Something that came up in January and has been sort of part of this project for quite some time is there's a photovoltaic requirement, and there was a question of, okay, well, if you get rid of this 5-story parking garage, which if you had seen the original plans, there was a center island that had photovoltaic cells. So we went and measured that, and it was about 10,000 square feet of solar. And so we set a project goal to exceed that and find a place on campus to put it. And so we did a number of studies, and we found out how much area we could fit. So one of the differences between a life science building and an office building is we have a lot more equipment on the roofs. And so that would be limiting. And so we came up with 2 strategies. We'll maximize the area that we can put it horizontally, but because these buildings do get a great southerly, we'll also put some vertically. And so we can actually get 14,000 feet under our current scheme of solar to meet that requirement that we know was a target for the prior project. And so we wanted to share that because I know that was a question last time that we hadn't looked at. And so this would be our strategy to, live in the spirit of the old ones, even though we don't have that big 5-story parking garage anymore.
And you can see the area on the slides then where we are showing in plan where that can happen. We have obviously a lot of equipment on the roof here, but we think on the south side of these buildings we can add additional PVs on the wall. This is the section through the project. The bottom one is north-south. Get a sense of what the space is like and the sort of scale. We have an arcade that runs along really 3 sides of the public space, so that allows you to kind of move out of the rain or in cover around the edge of that public space. And then the color blocks, the red and the yellow, show the public uses that we're putting underneath that courtyard. And this view then shows the ramp as it comes up, hooks into the these terraces, and the spaces out in front. So that's a bit of a quick walk through where we've been in the last few months. We've just outlined some of the highlights and the changes since we last got together. We've raised the building up, we've stepped the building back, we've enlarged the public amenities and the access to them, and we've done our best to kind of really get the kind of public spirit of the building that we had talked about some months ago. We have a data sheet here in terms of areas we can go through, and project summary here. And if we want to talk more about TDMs and parking, Hardik can address those here. I don't know if there are any questions in advance of that, though.
Why don't we just hold that thought for one moment? Did you have more?
No, I didn't.
Okay. I just want to compliment you because the last presentation you did earlier this year, your attention to detail is really quite impressive. And the other suggestions and questions addressed by the commissioners, it seems like you've investigated all of those, including the solar.
Yep.
And I do recall members of the public expressed concern about the slough, wildlife, building, lighting, glare, noise. So that setting back 60 feet solved a lot of that. And a couple things, it's troubling to me because some of the newer commissioners didn't have the benefit of your earlier presentation, but I just wanted to give them an idea what was different about your project. As I recall, is you create life science buildings that tenants can come in, they can do customized spaces. It's not one business. Could you address a little bit of that? And as I recall, you are also part of the Genesis group down the road. Just a little bit of what this is, because you've mentioned campus, but we got a little bit more idea in the previous,
Sure.
just for the benefit of the rest of the commissioners.
So one thing that when we say life science, I mean, we're really talking about basic research companies, and what that means, and what's a little bit different about what we do versus what many of our competitors do is we at Phase 3 actually will build this to what we would call a ready to occupy state. So if you were to walk in our labs, and we'd obviously be welcome anyone to come tour them at the Genesis project. So there's 6 stories of laboratories in the South Tower, and the North Tower, the 21-story building you're going up, will have 20 stories of laboratories. But if you were to go into them, they look very much like your high school science labs. They have benching, and a lot of it is the discovery research that's being done at the early stage life science companies, and we really target a much smaller company, groups in the 10 to 40,000 foot range versus some of the bigger campuses you see. And what those guys are looking for today is to be able to move into space and do their science. And so what we'll be doing at this campus is really, we've designed it in a way that it can accommodate, the building at the southern end here could be split on each floor to accommodate 10,000 foot users, but then could also grow up to where a user could take a whole building. And so they're really well designed to kind of meet all the needs along that growth curve. But our plan would be to come in and build these out so they're ready to occupy. What we found found is that about 80% of companies can work within a great sort of base, and then they'll sprinkle in sort of the last 10 to 20%. And we found we can build that efficiently and effectively, and it's what we've delivered at the Genesis project. We own 4,000 Shoreline, which is also on Sierra Point. That was a very large success and similar model where we built it out speculatively before we had tenants. And so that would be our plan at this project as well.
Okay, so I think maybe to start the conversation here from the commissioners, I think it's probably best if the two of us who were here before start with questions. And I'm going to just take the lead on this because from your presentation I had a couple instant questions. One was the parking. It occurs to me you have not changed the number of spaces, am I correct?
Hardik can speak to the exact specificity of how many we lost, but we did lose.
You
about
did lose
100.
some.
Yeah, when we, my name is Hardik Odani, I'm with
Yes.
SOM. So when we shrunk the podium size,
Yes.
we lost parking on 2 levels. We had about 870 parking stalls
Oh,
before.
was that many? Okay.
We did gain a few back on the surface parking, so we had fewer surface parking before. But, now we're at about 127 surface parking and about 650 or so structured parking, a total
Okay.
of about 780 parking stalls.
And since we have you there, would you address the TDM,
Yes, absolutely.
please?
While they're pulling it up, I'd just like to say that one of our fears, this project, I think at the earliest would likely be built and have tenants moving in the very, very end of 21. And one of Phase 3's concerns, especially with the old parking garage and just big parking garage in general, is we're sort of in a mode shift changing world, and stranded parking garages are a big concern in the general industry. We've seen in our own projects the parking demands dropping. Because a lot more people are using Ubers and other modes of transportation today. And then life science generally, and Hardik can cover some of this, is much less. So for us, we actually are not concerned about the lower amount of parking because we do believe with the TDM and with what's happening in the world over the next few years, that we'd be better in this situation than having a very large amount of parking spots that never get used.
So currently we have parking on the south side of the property. Sorry.
And could you please, it wasn't clear to me where you moved some of the surface parking to. You mentioned that there's another area now.
So previously we didn't have any parking on the west side. When we pulled the buildings and the podium back, we were able to gain some double loaded parking along the fire truck access.
Okay, so it's over on the far west.
You see it in the models, the previous theme, we really had just enough for access and barely the trail.
Could you speak into the microphone, please?
This side in this model, you can see that we had pushed it right up to the fire access here, and we were putting a trail in, but it's pretty darn tight. Here we have pushed it back, and that 60 feet allows us then to have parking on 2 sides as well as planting on both sides as well. So that was the move. This is the additional parking that was now surfaced, but you can imagine we took approximately that much out of the base of the building.
So what that gets us is about 781 parking stall at a ratio of 1.85 per 1,000 square feet. What we did is we took a look at what the estimated parking demand is for life sciences lab and R&D campus, which is different from an office building. So looking at a 40 to 60% split between office and R&D use, we're coming up with about 2.55 a ratio of 2.55 per 1,000 square feet, which generates a demand of about 1,057 spaces. We also looked at data from adjacent campuses like Juilliard and Genentech, and this data is normalized based on if there was no TDM measures employed on those campuses. Those campuses are coming up with a ratio of about 2.17 to 2.42, which is roughly translates to about 900 to 1,000 spaces. We've also seen that the threshold seems to be at 95% occupancy for these campuses, which again translates to between 950 and 1,050 spaces. Like I said, the proposed project has about 775 to 780 parking stalls. So we realize there's a shortfall of about 173 to 282 parking stalls, and this is without employing any TDM measures. So the next slide, this roughly translates to about a 18 to 27% shortfall that the TDM measures would have to cover. So we looked at some potential TDM reduction measures. Right off the bat, the Sierra Point shuttle service currently provides a reduction it's used by 14% of the employees in Sierra Point. So that itself it provides a reduction of 14% in the parking. We've looked at other future strategies like parking cash out, subsidized transit fares, voluntary commute trip reduction program, subsidized ride sharing, fare carpool matching, bicycle parking, bicycle repair stations, bike share memberships, and on-site car share spaces and subsidized memberships, which per the California Air Pollution Control Officers Association can lead to a reduction of about 16% of the parking demand. So combined, these measures could result in a potential reduction of 30% of the parking requirement, and which would exceed our threshold for a targeted reduction of 27%.
Okay. I have a couple other questions, but I'm going to move to Commissioner Sayason.
Yeah, so you spoke about having facilities on the property like restaurants and a gym and whatnot. Is that going to be open to the public as well?
Yes.
So if that's the case, I mean, in terms of parking, the space that you're going to create, does that account for visitors and whatnot? Or, I mean, is the parking, is some of the parking going to be allocated specifically for your tenants and then the rest for, staff and public? Or how are you intending that?
Our thought is we would have some zone for visitors, and we'd have to determine how much that would be depending on the demand on the restaurant and use of the health club. We have some spaces that are set aside for access to water, but we should probably pull those out in terms of our calculation. At the moment, we've been doing it as really as a lump sum for that area.
Okay.
I think the primary users that we think will probably be people in the building, but I think the spirit of it is that we want to open it to others, particularly those who are in the immediate neighborhood that could walk from their building or walk down the path and come here. And this area doesn't have a lot of options, but I think that it was mainly the immediate. We don't see it necessarily, we hope maybe, but not as a destination restaurant.
Right, but yeah, so I'm just thinking ahead that if you're not going to prohibit the public from frequenting your gym or the restaurant, what if they come and they take a lot of the space that the employees expected, so it's just a thought. I don't know.
I think it's a good point, and we'll factor that in here.
Yeah, I mean, I think we could get some numbers together, but I don't believe, I mean, the size of the restaurant won't serve likely more than 200 lunches a day, and then most of those will be likely on campus. And then the fitness center itself, I mean, we anticipate there might be some users who come from the public, but more of the users will be in the building, and we would account for their spaces inside of the office space already. So we can do some more analysis and provide a calculation next time we see you of what we think that would be, but we don't believe that space will drive a significant demand of parking.
On parking, is there any chance you've had any discussions with the neighbors, both to the east and to the south, about whether or not at current levels what they're using, whether that could provide you with some additional parking for the public?
We have not spoken to the neighbors to the east or kind of the big lot to the south, the Diamond Brothers, about that. There is quite a bit of parking. We did, as I think Michael mentioned, we do now own 1000 Marina, which is the Hitachi building just south of this. The utilization there is less than needed, and our plan with that is also to have it for even smaller life science companies, and no reduction will go down. So we do believe there could be the opportunity to, if this was, if the parking was impacted, we believe there's sufficient spaces that we could go create relationships through reciprocal easement agreements or purchase some parking, and even in the south we think there's enough that we could get closer or bring up the parking ratio a little bit.
Okay, Commissioner Saison, you have anything else? Okay, so let's move on. Commissioner Gomez?
Well, thank you, well, first and foremost for presenting. I was unaware of this project until today, or actually a couple days ago when I read the initial write-up. My initial concerns were actually around sea level rise, but it seems like that's been adequately addressed in the plan.
Yeah, I should just add, we cut out the sea level rise section. That we're actually raising the Bay Trail up so that it's above the 50-year estimate for sea level rise, so that at least this section of the trail, will be, we hope, out of the water in 50 years.
Okay. Yeah, that was kind of the first thing that really came to mind. And then secondly, just looking at how you're trying to integrate the design elements into into kind of the natural flow of that area. For me, it seems like an intriguing proposal. I think that there's a lot of development plans over in the Sierra Point area, and that's going to be really interesting as all the various projects come into fruition, because there is a lot of planned growth in this area, and I think that the concerns about parking, I think, are valid. The one question I have is kind of the broader scope, the access to the area. Just kind of thinking about traffic flows and like kind of how we think about that at a bigger scale as the HCP property is being developed. This one's being developed. The other firm, the name is skipping me right now, and just what that flow off of Sierra Point is going to look like. And I don't know how we necessarily address that in this particular session right now.
Well, if I could, just briefly, there are some master plan improvements for intersection, signalization, widening of certain on-ramps and off-ramps that are part of the broader Sierra Point project. As you know, the project was originally entitled as a master plan probably 40 years ago.
Right.
It's maybe a little slow in coming to fruition, and I think it's really exciting that it is. But a lot of these improvements were tied to levels of development. So you'll see those kind of, with these projects coming online, there will be additional improvements that will be installed along with that. That's been kind of master planned for a number of years. It was looked at both with this project originally as well as with the HCP redevelopment 10 years ago in terms of were those improvements still going to be sufficient for the demand.
Okay. All right. Well, that
Can I
sounds encouraging.
add one thing too, Commissioner?
Yeah, please.
So one of the other things we discussed quite significantly is the current entitlement for this site, which is of a little bit bigger project on a square footage basis, was for office. And so office would have a density of about 4 people per 1,000 compared to our 2.5. So for, that basically will eliminate about 35% of our people. So it actually, by moving to a more research and development design, it should, from the planning perspective, actually reduce the sort of number of occupants that would eventually occupy Sierra Point.
Okay. I probably have a couple other comments, but I want to allow.
We can circle back to you. Okay. Commissioner Gooding?
Could I see the north elevation again, please, or the from the Bay Trail, the existing Bay Trail?
The rendering or the
that one, yeah.
this is the east elevation toward the street.
All right.
Let me get you to the other one here. So this is this one here. That's from the northwest. And then there was another view we had that, let me go a little bit further. This one here.
So the wall, if you will, to the left of the ramp, if you're going up the ramp, what's the composition what's that going to look like to the Bay Trail users and the people on the lawns? Is it just wall?
The thin wall on the left side of the stair? Or
Let's see. How do I describe this?
Are you talking about the ramp, the wall to the left of the ramp?
that one.
Right.
Yeah, at the moment we are thinking that we have the opportunity, we could let some daylight into spaces directly behind it. We had thought that it would be part of the kind of, probably the concrete on the base of the building. It's possible we could plant it if we wanted to have more of the kind of green feel, or we could plant from above and soften that edge. But I think conceptually, and maybe it doesn't quite come, we wanted to kind of step the landscape up into that space, and that wall seems like perhaps an opportunity to continue that idea.
And what is behind or under that wall?
We have some health club behind some of it, and we have some parking behind a piece of it. But mostly, we could open it up to light glass into the health club zone.
I think the only other question I have is a timing issue about the Bay Trail. What would be the anticipated timing for the installation or completion of the Bay Trail relative to the rest of the project?
So there's quite a bit of site work that will need to be done. The clay cap for the landfill that's out there isn't on the site yet. And so, and site work usually is one of the last aspects of a project, just because when you have big heavy equipment doing serious construction, you don't want to mess up any of the sort of finished site work. So it's likely that would be towards the end of the project, under like a normal course of construction. So that our plan would probably be to deliver sort of towards the end of 21 as well.
Thank you.
Commissioner Patel.
What's a biotreatment area?
A biotreatment area is a way of catching water runoff and treating that water with plants and organic materials, so that when it does leach through there, it's been passed through an organic filtering system essentially, and we've distributed it throughout the site. So we are catching that stormwater, rainwater, treating that water as it comes in and before it moves through our site.
Got it. I wanted to ask you about TDM reductions. A lot of the TDM reductions seem to be in the form of transportation benefits, if for lack of a better word, things that would sort of be sold to employees to use these certain aspects of transportation. Would that be implemented by the employers, or would that be part of a contract? How does that go into place?
Sure. So life science buildings are operated where the tenants pick up sort of all the operating costs of the campus. And so what we do is, if there's a cost of a shuttle service, or there's an Uber program, or there's a rideshare program that does require charges, we will put those into the operating expenses of the campus. And so the tenants effectively do pay for them, but it's not like they can opt in or out of them. It's almost like any of the amenities on campus. If we put in a gym, there's a cost to running that gym that ultimately passes back through to the tenants, and same would be true for these transportation demand management programs.
Okay, so those TDM reductions that you mentioned would be part of a contract that you would enter into.
The tenants would basically pay through them via their lease,
Yep.
and then property management through the owner would manage and make sure they were implemented.
Got it.
Yeah, it typically, I think in other projects, and I'm sure in this one, we would be reporting back the success of our TDM program annually, and showing how many people were using each of the strategies we were implementing. And that becomes a landlord, not a tenant obligation.
Got it. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to circle back. You mentioned the SLU side and BCDC with fencing, and no suggestions having been made, and concern to keep people, dogs out, understanding what we heard months ago about the sensitivity of the wildlife. Would you perhaps consider native grasses? Some of them can be pretty tall. I don't know many adventurous dogs that like to go into thick grass. It would be natural, it would be not obstructing views. San Bruno Mountain Watch could probably recommend some species that would be well suited to the location. Since no one's giving you suggestions, that might be a place to start.
May I give a little bit of history? So
Sure.
the actual requirement doesn't come from BCDC. It comes from the initial study and mitigation measures related to the prior project. And so it was left as a sort of mitigation that needs to be implemented when the project's constructed, but it was left sort of open, and it said, get city and BCDC approval of what you implement. And I think the question at this stage for us really would be to go back as we go through our initial study is we don't believe the clapper rail won't be present. We think it's still utilizing the slough. And so when the report comes back, review those mitigation measures and see, instead of doing a fence, are there other alternative strategies that achieve, like what is the goal? The goal ultimately is to protect the habitat and protect the wildlife. But that doesn't necessarily need to be done with a hard fence. Maybe it could be done with grasses. And so I think the comments today are just, collaboratively in working with BCDC and kind of looking at, how do we put together all the pieces of this such that we meet everyone's goals. And we know that wildlife and protecting the wildlife will be a goal. What's the best way to do that sort of creates the most benefit? And I think the suggestion from BCDC, and I think tend to agree with, is that a fence is sort of like would be, we may have failed. There may be a better strategy, but that's something we need to really understand also with the, CEQA consultants and see if there is an alternative strategy. So we don't have an answer, but we were going to be exploring. This is one of the pieces we'll sort of bring back next time.
And one other thing I thought of, when you place the buildings closer together, have you done wind studies? Is that going to create more of a turbulence with any wind that enters that corridor? Just out of curiosity. And maybe it'll make it better. I don't know.
We are looking at the wind and we're pushing them closer together, we have some concern about the west side. We've those two buildings close together. We have to build a glass wall down at the pedestrian level there because it does kind of channel it. Most of the wind is coming from the northwest, west. We're probably pretty good underneath the building, but we'll study it in much more detail and do some computer analysis on it also. But the basic site strategy of trying to put the people in the lee, but also keep them in the sun, particularly around lunchtime, that it faces almost, as you can see, almost due north, and we can get sun in there for those critical parts of the day. And during the summer, we get very good sun in there. So.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just a couple of comments around the energy attributes of the building. I find it very, again, encouraging that you strapped on all this sort of solar photovoltaic to the plan. And I know you were saying 2021 is the target. California's got some pretty ambitious goals of new commercial construction being net zero come 2030. Just kind of wondering how you're looking at the other aspects of this building. Are you interested in maximizing the energy efficiency potential and looking at other ways to essentially create the greenest building possible within the scope? Maybe it's in the plan somewhere and I just haven't seen that. I'm just generally curious.
I believe that we're required to build it to LEED Gold, so we'll have that. And then we're constantly looking for, so one difference in life science versus office is they use a lot more energy. They have a lot more, all that equipment on the roof.
Oh, I'm aware, from my day job.
But to the extent we can provide competitive reductions to utility bills, it makes our project much more competitive. So we're always looking for additional strategies that can, that create that sustainability at the project. But between the solar and the LEED Gold, that's what we've looked at thus far.
Okay. Well, I'd recommend maybe we should talk. I'm not sure actually how to address this because I'd like to encourage this building to pursue I'd like to make some recommendations. But being new to the commission and the type of work that I do in my outside of this, I'm not really sure what the boundary is on this. So I'm kind of.
One thing that might help is in their original presentation when we brought up solar and we're encouraging that, they explained to us that a lot of the air filtration mechanical systems take up the lion's share of rooftop. So it really impaired the amount of area. The only other place I could think of was that north side by the ramp, and that doesn't seem like enough to capture solar. And then I thought of the parking side on the west, but I don't believe western exposure is the best for solar. I was just trying creatively to think of where you could put more solar.
I think there are other strategies, building strategies.
Yeah, there are, and I'm.
Envelopes and other things that we'll get into when we start to.
Okay.
And you can sort of see some of them already happening in terms of where we're putting the glass and other things on the building right now. But we were, at least at this point, sort of defining the massing, reshaping the massing.
Got it.
But we'll continue to those. And as we go to a LEED Gold building, we'll outline a number of those strategies as well.
Okay, all right, excellent.
Commissioner Seisler?
No other comment other than, as between the fencing and the planting, I'm all for the planting. So you can, any type of planting I think is preferable over a fence, so.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Commissioner Gooding? Anything, other questions come to mind?
Can I go back to the Bay Trail just for 1 second? And I think I just missed this. Can you explain again what connection there will be or might be at the southwestern end?
Let's see if I can get an image that will get us all the way down there. I think we don't quite reach it in our site plan, but perhaps this is the best we can do.
Yeah, down there.
Yeah, but can I point it on the model? Maybe that's easier.
Sure. Whatever works.
We're going to need a microphone, so feedback comes out. There you go.
So this is actually a great way to see the whole of Sierra Point here. The Bay Trail, you can see it here on the model, really goes all the way around. It stops right here. What I think is the really interesting opportunity for this site and this particular owner is by uniting these two parcels here, we're able then to bring the path, continue it along here, all the way along here, up against the slough edge, and continue along here and then deposit it right to this corner. This is the sidewalk down here ends right here, and that's where the crosswalk is. So I think our goal would be, let's take the bike path and the walking path and maybe even the buffer zones and continue that along this side all the way and essentially complete the loop.
And for the public, that intersection is what?
Do we have the name of this road?
I believe that's Sierra Point Parkway and Marina Boulevard.
Okay. So this would be on the northwest corners where we'd end it at that crosswalk right here, and that completes the sidewalk here. So that essentially is, I don't know, not quite 25%, but maybe 20% of the loop that would complete the trail. It does also one important thing for the Bay Trail. As you go up north on 101, there's this area here that is really very, very narrow. Current plans, the way I understand it's been described to us, is that the Bay Trail at this point would actually loop underneath the highway and come up on this side and connect north, because there's not room directly adjacent here. So this allows then the trail to come around, take the loop, and then duck under the freeway here. So BCDC was very happy about this opportunity. This is a fairly new development here to do this south lane.
We acquired the building a week ago.
So it becomes part of kind of maybe a bigger vision for this side of Sierra Point. So.
And so there are plans in this building to redo some of the landscaping here, also to address. Right now it's actually fairly original landscaping, no drought tolerant work has been done, and so we think there's also some just general improvements that should be done there, and so as part of that we would do the Bay Trail as well.
Thanks.
Commissioner Patel?
I have no further questions.
Okay. So I'm going to try to just circle back and summarize some of the comments. So the parking, if you could investigate, since you own the adjacent property, perhaps that accommodating the health club visitors, and I think you'll have restaurant visitors. I think you'll get a lot of patrons from Brisbane. You got the weigh-in from our commissioners about we're not so crazy about the fence. Plantings would be preferred. Let me think what else. If you could find more solar or other energy sources. I give you credit because it's a unique site, and it seems like you're trying to honor that. And also the fact that you've taken into account that although it is your private property, you are making it very inviting for the public. And that's always been a concern I've heard in Brisbane about much of this waterfront area, that it be accessible to the public and that it be welcoming and it doesn't just look like a private campus. And it seems like you've taken into account a lot of those features in the design. So it'd be quite interesting to see what you do with this, and appreciate your coming back to us and allowing us to give your feedback.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next on our agenda, we have a workshop this evening. I see our city attorney, Michael Roush, is here. Good evening. Thank you for coming tonight.
Well, thank you very much, members of the commission. It's my pleasure to be here. I haven't had a chance to meet all of you in any particular way, but welcome to serving on the Planning Commission. I hope that your time on the commission will be very enjoyable. I know that when I was an assistant city attorney for many years, I went to very many Planning Commission meetings and got to know the planning commissioners very well before I became city attorney in Pleasanton for 21 years, and had my assistant then attend most of the Planning Commission meetings. And fortunately, Mr. Swicky does a really good job of running these meetings without having an attorney here most of the time. So you haven't had to have John's been my stand-in. But I'm always glad to attend meetings if there's an issue that comes up that would be the commission would feel that it needs somebody, either myself or somebody from my firm, to be here. Always glad to do it, and certainly keep that open. And along those lines, certainly in this memo, which is a lot of material to read, and I apologize for that, but I know that many of you perhaps have not served on a public board or commission before, so I wanted to give you an overview of some of the items that I have found that new commissioners and commissions, and even people who have been on commissions for a while, sometimes need a refresher course on. As I indicated, the Planning Commissioner Handbook that John's department has put together, I've looked at that. It's very comprehensive. Again, a lot of material, but I think it is certainly a useful guide for you to use for most of the routine items that you may have questions about in terms of your service as a commissioner. Certainly, the items set forth in this memo deal with a number of items that I said that may be a little bit out of the ordinary. Some of them, of course, are very common, such as what constitutes a meeting and the conflict of interest issues. And I'll cover these in an overview fairly briefly, but certainly if there's any questions about any of these items, I'll be glad to try to answer that. The open meeting law, the Brown Act, certainly provides that because you are a legislative body, as that term is defined in the Brown Act, that when you have a matter that is within this commission's subject matter jurisdiction, and quite frankly, most planning issues are within this commission's subject matter jurisdiction, you need to have those discussions and deliberations and actions at a regular published notice meeting for which there's been an agenda, so that members of the public can certainly come down, be heard, and you can take their comments into consideration along with the staff report in making informed decisions. Which is not to say that in all cases that a majority of you can't attend other matters. For example, if there's a planning conference, often every year there's usually a planning conference in Monterey that John and his staff often attend, and I know from past experience that many commissioners like to attend that because they're usually very good programs and very helpful. And so if a majority of you end up at one of those conferences, that's perfectly fine. You go out to dinner together, that's perfectly fine, but just don't talk about subject matter jurisdiction within your that you might discuss as a commission, because that could be considered a meeting under the Brown Act. I think the takeaway on all these various things where the commission can go as a majority, whether it's at another legislative body or at a social or ceremonial event, majority can attend, but just don't talk with each other about the business that's in front of the commission. I know sometimes can be a challenge, because that's something that obviously many of you may have in common, but you just have to find other things that you might have in common that don't deal with particular land use issues. One of the issues that certainly come up from time to time are what are called serial meetings, and that's why I always admonish council members and planning commission members and other legislative body members that it's okay for one of you to talk with one other member of your commission or committee, but do not have a further conversation with another commission member, and try to have the person who you may have contacted not have that person contact another member of the commission, because you can end up having a collective concurrence about an item that is outside the meeting. So you have to be very careful about that. And again, my experience has been both here and elsewhere that commissioners are very good about acknowledging that and not engaging in those types of conversations. Certainly, from time to time, applicants or other members of the community who have a concern about an item that's going to appear before the commission will want to meet with you privately. And some councils have adopted policies that prohibit that. This council has not. Although my understanding is that the practice has been for commissioners not to meet privately with individuals or with applicants. But if you do, and again, there's no prohibition against it, our advice, of course, is that if you have those meetings, that when the matter comes before you, that you disclose that you did have the meeting and indicate the substance of the conversation. We would certainly caution you to be a listener and not make commitments when you meet with these either applicants or interested parties, but be a good listener, understand what their concerns and issues are, but make no representation about how you intend to act or react to what they're saying. From time to time, I know that you have on your agenda 2 places for oral communications, an opportunity for members of the public to bring to your attention items that are not on the agenda, but that are still within your subject matter jurisdiction. And there's often the desire, when somebody brings up an item that you certainly may have knowledge about, to want to discuss it with that person or discuss it as a body. The purpose of the oral communication is for you to either respond briefly to those matters or to refer the matter to staff, or at some other point to ask that the item be put on your regular agenda so that the public can be advised that you're going to talk about that and you don't end up having a lengthy discussion with the person who's making the statements at the meeting. I know that sometimes that's a difficult thing to do sometimes, because either an item will come up that, like I said, you have knowledge about, or you really want the staff to get into an answer on it. But I would just caution you to not engage in that conversation at that time. But if it's important enough to want to warrant a discussion, then have the item agendized and brought back at your next meeting. Another issue that certainly is coming across everyone's plate these days is social media, and what is your role and responsibility in terms of whether or not to participate in social media. As indicated in the memo, the Council's Information and Technology Committee is looking at a broader social media policy, more in addition to the city's social media policy, which really talks more about internal distribution of information or information that's given out to the public. The concern that has been expressed to me from time to time is that a person on a commission or a committee may say something on a private social media page such as Facebook or Twitter, etc., and then if another commissioner or 2 other commissioners are also looking at that and making post in reply, that suddenly you can have a situation where a collective concurrence has occurred among a majority of the commission, and someone could make the argument that a Brown Act violation has occurred. And so to avoid that, I would try to keep my post on social media about items that are coming before this commission to a minimum. And also the concern would be is that if a commissioner has very, very strong feelings about an item and posts that on social media, an applicant or members of the community might feel that that is demonstrating unacceptable bias, and sometimes that can rise to the level where courts have said that a particular commissioner or council member has expressed such bias that they cannot participate in the decision. And I don't think any of you want to take yourself out of that decision-making process, so just a word of caution on that. The memo goes into great detail about conflicts of interest. I know that all of you, when you were sworn in and serve on the commission, had to file the Form 700, in which you list your various sources of income, business entities that you may have, that you may be a part of. And you have to be, you have to be very cautious about those kind of situations to make sure that if an applicant comes before you that is a source of income to you or to a member of your family, or is a source of income to a business entity of which you are a member, or if the application or the item is within a certain distance of your own personal property, that you recognize that as a potential financial conflict of interest that may cause you to be disqualified from participating in that particular decision. Again, if those issues do come up, your best bet is to check with me or my office, and just to confirm that under these circumstances you should or you should not participate. And I know from time to time, in a community as small as this, that those things can happen. But I think, again, most commissioners are very, very, they're very concerned about that, and they honor that. But just kind of keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at various applications. One of the other items that come up that is maybe somewhat out of the ordinary are what are called common law conflicts of interest. These aren't necessarily financial conflicts of interest, but they still could occur in situations where a commissioner may be a director on for example, nonprofit organization. And as a director on that nonprofit organization, you have a duty to that organization to be very zealous and have an obligation toward that organization. If that organization then comes before the commission, you also have an obligation as a commissioner to look for the benefit of the public and not be swayed by what is being presented out there from the organization. In that particular case, and these do happen from time to time, the common law conflict of interest indicates that you have to recuse yourself from participating in that particular decision because of the competing conflict, as it were, between your duty to the organization and the duty as a commissioner. Again, if you're simply a member of the organization, the conflict doesn't arise, but if you are actually on the board of directors, it does arise. And then finally, on this topic, just again, this has happened from time to time. If a commissioner is absent or going to be absent from a meeting, but has a very strong or has opinion about a matter that's going to be before the commission, whether you should provide those comments to the commission so that they can consider, the rest of the commission can consider your viewpoint. We suggest that you don't do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, you may not have all the information that the rest of the commission may receive during the public hearing process or from the staff report, and that may change your opinion. But probably more importantly, I think it's the concept that whoever is before the commission may not feel that that you would have all the information that you should have, don't have the benefit of other comments that the other commissioners may have, and that your comments may sway an opinion of another commissioner without having the chance to have the applicant have a chance to respond to that. So for that reason, we suggest that if you are going to be absent, and you feel strongly about the item, that you simply request that the item be continued until you can be there. And in most of the time, that can be accommodated unless there is some statutory deadline that would require the commission to take the action at that time. I think that covers all of the major items that I set forth in the report or in the memo, but I'll be certainly glad to answer any questions about these or any other items. And again, want to always encourage you to contact me if you have questions during your tenure.
Commissioner Sayasan, any questions?
No question. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Patel?
No, thank you.
Commissioner Gooding?
None, thank you.
Commissioner Gomez?
No.
Okay. I'm just going to bring something up because I know I was on another committee and it was at the beginning of social media being a concern. And fortunately, our city attorney wrote some memos, and I think at first it was not all taken well because people didn't like having their hands tied on social media. But something I'll recount just briefly is that if someone goes on social media and just says, is reacting to something someone else posts that has an opinion, and say a committee or commission member says, oh, I agree, and then someone else on the same committee or commission says, good point, right there you're starting this, giving the impression this is a sentiment on that board without the benefit of a real meeting in public. So it seems so innocuous, or on Facebook someone just says, I like, and same thing right there, because then it's construed this board or commission has strong opinions they've discussed in advance or amongst themselves, and you really don't want any of that to happen. So if it seems excessive, I don't think it really is. It's just being prudent and trying to stay out of it. And it really is, it's more revealing when you think about what items might come before the Planning Commission. It's pretty broad. It's pretty hard to say this will never come before the commission. In fact, things that are before the council, you might say, well, that's the council. Some of those things come before the Planning Commission. So I appreciate your admonition to just be careful and think about it, and when in doubt, just don't do it. So it was very thorough. Thank you very much.
Well, and I appreciate the the second to the caution. Again, my sense of it is that something like a like or those kind of things, I don't think that's going to really sway the rest of the commission to vote a certain way. But members of the public, have a different viewpoint, and rather than put yourself in a situation where, where someone kind of raises the issue, I would suggest, again, do your discretion, use caution, and all things being equal, just, you can internally say, yes, I like that, or I agree, and I'm going to maybe take that sentiment forward. And when I get to the public meeting, indicate, I've read these things on social media, there's 20 people out there who think this is a good idea, and I agree with it. But in that point, you're at the meeting, and there's no harm in indicating that you've read. It's no different than if 20 people came down here and spoke. Reading 20 posts on the Facebook, those are opinions of, assuming they're Brisbane folks, of residents, and nothing wrong with relying on that information. But again, indicating your agreement or disagreement at the public meeting saves you a lot of headache down the road.
One other thing that you pointed out, which is I always, one of my practices, and I encourage other commissioners, is when there's a project coming up, go visit the site, because there's so much, no matter how many photographs staff takes, you just don't have a sense of the overall surroundings until you see it. And many a time I've had neighbors or a property owner come out to talk to me. They're curious, what are you doing? What are you looking at? And I will tell them. Sometimes they'll try to pursue and say, so what do you think of this or that? Or I don't want this or that to happen. And I will say, if you have some strong sentiments, you should really attend the meeting. And they'll go, well, I'll wait and see what happens. And then if I have a problem with it, I'll say something, and I'll go, and then it's too late, so you really need to show up at the meeting. So that's another instance I find you just have to be non-committal, not state opinions or policy or allude to it. And more than anything, if people have strong feelings, say, then you need to come speak. You need to come voice your concerns or comments. They could be beneficial to everyone. Staff have anything to add that no? Okay. Thank you very much, Michael. Appreciate that. And we look forward to seeing you again now and then. You're always invited. All right. I don't see on the agenda items initiated by staff, so I guess
I think I've been edited out by Julia. I'm
Oh,
not sure what
do you
that's
have
about.
some items?
Actually, no, I do not.
Oh.
She must have known.
Okay, you don't want to make one up at the last minute then. Okay. Items initiated by the commission. Anyone?
Just a general inquiry, because I was busy with a lot of work the entire month of June has been really busy. Did the subcommittee on trees, did that go forward, or is that still in motion?
It's going to be scheduled. I haven't heard anything about a date certain. I think they wanted to get a work product out in advance to make the meeting more useful, and maybe that work product is not speeding along as one would have hoped. That's my guess.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I
Yeah,
appreciate that.
One of my actions.
And in case it comes up again, we're switching to Thursdays in August. I don't
Yes.
remember which meeting, if it's the first or the second, but it is in August. And anyone else? No? No. Okay, so we do have a cancellation showing for the next meeting, our regular meeting of July 10. So we will be adjourning today to the regular meeting of July 24, 2018 at 7:30, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Second?
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.